What happens when a military deserter running from justice crashes into the life of an Apache woman who's never met a man strong enough to stand beside her? In 1883, Wyoming Marcus Stone thought he was just looking for a place to hide. Instead, he found the one person who could teach him that real courage isn't about running from your past. It's about standing still long enough to build a future. But when his former commander arrives with an ultimatum that could destroy everything, Marcus must choose between the safety he's always sought and the love that he never knew he needed. If you enjoy stories of redemption, second chances, and love that conquers all boundaries, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable Western tales. The Guardian's Choice, a Western romance story. The sound of hoofbeats thundered through the canyon like a war drum, echoing off red stone walls that had witnessed 1,000 years of secrets. Marcus Stone pressed his horse harder up the narrow trail, sweat mixing with the dust that coated his face despite the autumn chill. Behind him, the voices of Marshall Crawford's men grew fainter, but not faint enough. 3 days he'd been running. 3 days since he'd slipped away from Fort Collins in the pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind his uniform, his commission, and any hope of sleeping peacefully again. The turquoise amulet around his neck bounced against his chest with each stride, the only thing of value he'd kept besides his horse and the clothes on his back. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is walk away from a fight that's wrong. She'd been talking about his father's drinking, but the words had taken on new meaning when Colonel Torres had outlined the pacification strategy for the Apache reservations. Marcus had seen enough blood in the Civil War. He wouldn't spill more in the name of progress. The canyon opened into a hidden valley, and Marcus reined in his horse, breathing hard. Grass grew thick around a natural spring, and the walls rose high enough to hide smoke from a small fire. It looked like sanctuary, and he'd learned not to question gifts like that. He was loosening his saddle when the voice cut through the air like a blade. "Turn around, slowly." Marcus froze, his hands still on the leather straps. The voice was female, but there was nothing soft about it. It carried the kind of authority that came from being obeyed without question. He turned, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. She stood 20 feet away, and everything about her commanded attention. Tall enough to look most men in the eye, with shoulders that spoke of strength earned through necessity rather than vanity. Her Apache clothing was mixed with pieces of frontier wear, practical and worn. Dark hair fell in a single braid down her back, and her eyes held the kind of steadiness that came from facing down more dangerous things than lone cowboys. But it was what hung around her neck that made Marcus's world tilt sideways. A turquoise stone wrapped in silver wire hanging from a leather cord, identical to the one his mother had given him years ago. "You're on sacred ground," she said, her English carrying only the slightest accent. "Leave now, and I won't need to remove you myself." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his own amulet, and her eyes tracked the movement. For just a moment, her steady composure flickered. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, taking a step closer. "My mother gave it to me." He kept his voice even, non-threatening. "She said it came from someone who saved her life during a fever, an Apache healer." The woman's jaw tightened, and Marcus saw her hand shift slightly toward the knife at her belt. "Your mother's name?" "Sarah Stone. This was 15 years ago, maybe more. She was dying, and your people found her, cared for her." He paused, watching her face. "She never stopped being grateful. Said she owed her life to a woman who asked for nothing in return." Something changed in the woman's expression. The suspicion remained, but it was joined by something else. Recognition, maybe, or pain. "My grandmother," she said quietly. "She made that amulet. Gave it to your mother when she left us healed and whole." The silence stretched between them, charged with the weight of connection neither had expected to find in this hidden valley. "Your grandmother saved my mother's life," Marcus said, "which means she saved mine too, since I wouldn't have been born without her healing." The woman studied him with new intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. "I am Ayana Many Horses. This valley belongs to my people, and I guard it. Marcus Stone," he gestured to the canyon entrance. "And right now I need a place to hide from men who want to hang me for desertion." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You ran from the army." "I ran from participating in a massacre." The words came out harder than he'd intended. "My commanding officer had plans for the Apache reservations, plans that involved a lot of dead children and old people. I couldn't be part of that. Ayana moved closer close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. So you chose exile over honor. I chose conscience over convenience. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Honor doesn't mean blindly following orders when those orders are wrong. She was quiet for a long moment, studying him with the intensity of someone reading a language most people couldn't see. Finally, she nodded toward a cluster of rocks near the spring. Make your camp there, one night. Tomorrow you leave and never speak of this place to anyone. Understood. He paused, then added, thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how uncomfortable I can make your stay if you give me reason. But there was something in her remarks that wasn't entirely unfriendly, and Marcus found himself almost smiling as she turned and walked toward the far end of the valley, where he now noticed a well-concealed shelter built into the rock face. As he unsaddled his horse and made camp, Marcus became aware of being watched. Not by Ayana, who had disappeared into her shelter, but by someone else. A figure moved in the shadows near the rocks, too small to be an adult. You can come out, he said quietly, not looking directly toward the movement. I won't hurt you. The figure emerged slowly, a boy, maybe 14 years old, walking with a pronounced limp that spoke of an old injury. Apache like Ayana, with intelligent eyes that held too much knowledge for his age. You're the deserter she spoke of, the boy said, his English careful but clear. I suppose I am. What's your name? Little Wolf. The boy moved closer, his gait uneven but determined. Why did you really run from the soldiers? Marcus considered several answers, then settled on the truth. Because I watched my father drink himself to death, trying to forget the things he did in the war with Mexico. I decided I'd rather be called a coward than spend my life trying to forget the faces of children I'd helped kill. Little Wolf nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. Ayana says real strength is knowing when to fight and when to walk away. She sounds wise. She is. She's also alone too much. The boy's expression grew serious. She protects everyone, but no one protects her. Before Marcus could ask what he meant by that, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon again. Multiple horses moving fast and with purpose. Little Wolf's face went pale. They followed you, he whispered. Marcus was already moving, grabbing his rifle and checking the load. Get to Ayana. Tell her what's happening. But Ayana was already emerging from her shelter, and Marcus saw that she'd traded her mixed clothing for full Apache gear. War paint marked her cheeks, and she carried a rifle that looked well used. How many? She called. 4, maybe 5. Marcus took position behind a boulder that offered clear sight lines to the canyon entrance. They'll bottle us up here if we let them. No, Ayana moved to a different position, one that gave her a crossing angle to his. They'll try to talk first. Soldiers always want to follow rules, even bad ones. She was right. The hoofbeats stopped just outside the valley entrance, and a voice Marcus recognized all too well carried over the rocks. Stone, we know you're in there. Come out and we'll discuss terms. Marshal Crawford, the man who'd volunteered to hunt down deserters because he enjoyed the chase more than the capture. What terms would those be, Crawford? Marcus called back, not moving from cover. Surrender now, face court-martial like a man. Fight us, and we'll hang you from the nearest tree for resisting arrest. Marcus glanced toward Ayana, who shook her head slightly. She'd positioned herself where she could see the canyon mouth, and he trusted her judgment about what was coming. I need time to think about it, Marcus shouted. You've got 5 minutes. Then we're coming in, and anyone who gets in our way will be considered a hostile. The threat was clear, and Marcus felt his stomach clench. Crawford would have no qualms about shooting an Apache woman and a disabled boy if they stood between him and his quarry. I should go with them, he said quietly, knowing Ayana could hear him. This isn't your fight. My valley, my choice, she replied, not taking her eyes off the canyon entrance. Little Wolf, get to the back shelter. Now. The boy hesitated, looking between the two adults. Ayana, now. He limped away quickly, but Marcus noticed he didn't go as far as ordered. Instead, he took position behind rocks where he could still see and hear everything. You don't understand, Marcus said urgently. Crawford isn't just following orders. He's the kind of man who burns down whole settlements to get one fugitive. If you help me, he'll make your people pay for it. Ayana turned to look at him then, and something in her expression made his breath catch. Let me tell you something about my people, Marcus Stone. We've been paying for white men's anger for longer than you've been alive. One more threat doesn't change anything. She was right and he knew it. But the thought of her facing Crawford's men because of him made something twist painfully in his chest. Your grandmother saved my mother, he said finally. That created a debt, but I won't let you pay it with your life. You won't let me, Ayanna's voice carried a dangerous edge. You think I need your permission to defend my own land? Before he could answer, Crawford's voice boomed through the canyon again. Time's up, Stone. We're coming in. The first rider appeared at the valley entrance, and Marcus recognized Crawford immediately. Tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of hard living. Behind him came three more men, all armed and alert. There, Crawford pointed toward Marcus's position. Stone, you're under arrest for desertion in the face of the enemy. What enemy would that be? Marcus stood slowly, keeping his rifle ready, but not directly threatening. Last I checked, we weren't at war with anyone. The Apache are always the enemy, boy. You should have learned that by now. The words hung in the air like poison, and Marcus felt Ayanna stiffen beside him. He saw the exact moment Crawford noticed her, saw the marshal's expression shift from professional duty to something uglier. Well, well, looks like our deserter's been keeping company with the locals. Crawford's smile was razor thin. Makes sense, I suppose. Cowards and savages always find each other. Marcus felt rage ignite in his chest, but before he could respond, Ayanna stepped out from behind her cover. She moved with fluid grace, her rifle held casually but ready, and Marcus watched Crawford's men shift nervously in their saddles. This is sacred ground, she said clearly. You have no authority here. Crawford's laugh was harsh. I have all the authority I need, squaw. Federal warrant trumps whatever heathen claims you people think you have. The word hit like a slap, and Marcus saw Ayanna's jaw tighten, but her voice remained steady. Then show your warrant. Prove your authority extends to Apache land. Don't need to prove anything to you. Crawford's hand moved to his pistol. Just need to collect my prisoner and be on my way. The man you seek is under my protection, Ayanna said simply. He has eaten at my fire and sheltered in my valley. By Apache law, that makes him family. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. She was bluffing, had to be. They'd known each other for barely an hour, but the conviction in her voice was absolute. Crawford spat in the dust. Apache law doesn't mean spit to me, woman. Stand aside or I'll move you aside. That's when Marcus made his choice. Not the choice between surrender and resistance, but the choice between letting this remarkable woman face danger alone and standing beside her, regardless of the bondage. He stepped up next to Ayanna close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She's not standing aside Crawford, and neither am I. Crawford's eyes narrowed. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Stone. No, Marcus said quietly. I'm making it exactly as hard as it should be. The marshal's gaze moved between them, calculating odds and risks. 4 men against 2, but the woman was Apache, which meant she knew this terrain better than they did. The man was a trained soldier, deserter or not, and they were dug in with good cover, while his men were exposed in the open valley. This isn't over, Crawford said finally. I'll be back with more men, more authority, and when I come back, I won't be asking nicely. He wheeled his horse around, barking orders to his men. Within minutes, the sound of hoof beats faded, leaving the valley in silence. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He'll be back. Yes, Ayanna agreed, but not today. Today you're safe. She turned to look at him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not quite trust, but not suspicion either. Something warmer and more complex. Why did you do that? He asked. You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of memory. My grandmother used to say that sometimes the spirits send us what we need when we need it most. Maybe they sent a man running from an unjust war to remind me that courage comes in many forms. She paused, then added with the faintest smile, besides, I've been looking for a man strong enough to stand beside me instead of behind me. Today you proved you might be that man. Little Wolf emerged from his hiding place, limping toward them with something like excitement in his face. Does this mean he can stay longer than one night? Ayana looked at Marcus, her expression unreadable. That depends. Are you planning to keep running from Crawford, or are you ready to make a stand? Marcus thought about the question, really thought about it. For 3 days, he'd been focused on escape, on putting distance between himself and the consequences of his choice. But standing here in this hidden valley, watching the late afternoon light paint the canyon walls gold, feeling the steady presence of this remarkable woman beside him, he realized he was tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid, he said finally. If Crawford wants me, he can come and get me, but I won't make it easy for him. Ayana nodded, and Marcus thought he saw approval in her eyes. Then you can stay. But understand, if you're going to stand with me, you need to understand what that means. She gestured toward little Wolf, who had moved to stand between them with the easy familiarity of family. This boy is my son in all the ways that matter. His safety comes before everything else, including yours. If staying puts him in danger, then we find another way, Marcus interrupted. I won't let my problems become his. Little Wolf looked up at him with something like hope. You mean it? I mean it, kid. Ayana studied Marcus for another long moment, then nodded. We'll see, but for now you're welcome at our fire. As the sun set over the hidden valley, Marcus found himself sitting across a small fire from two people who had no reason to trust him, but had chosen to anyway. The turquoise amulet around his neck caught the firelight, and he thought about his mother, about the debt of gratitude that had somehow led him to this moment. Maybe the spirits did send people what they needed when they needed it most. And maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth standing still for. But even as that hope took root in his chest, he couldn't shake the memory of Crawford's promise. The marshal would be back, and when he came, he'd bring enough men to make resistance impossible. Unless they found a way to make it possible. Marcus looked across the fire at Ayana, who was teaching Little Wolf how to properly clean his rifle, and felt something shift inside him. For the first time since leaving Fort Collins, he wasn't thinking about running. He was thinking about fighting. Not the kind of fighting the army had taught him, the kind that left children dead and villages burning, but the kind his mother had shown him when she stood up to his father's drinking. The kind that protected what mattered and held the line against what was wrong. The kind that might just be worth dying for. Dawn came cold and clear to the hidden valley, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold. Marcus woke to the sound of quiet voices and the smell of coffee brewing over a small fire. He'd slept better than he had in months, despite the hard ground and the knowledge that Crawford was somewhere out there planning his return. Ayana was crouched beside Little Wolf near the fire, speaking in Apache, too quietly for Marcus to hear. The boy nodded seriously at whatever she was saying, then limped toward the shelter built into the rock face. Good morning, Marcus said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. Morning. Ayana poured coffee into a metal cup and handed it to him. Little Wolf is gathering herbs for his morning medicine. His leg pains him when the weather changes. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. It was better than anything he'd had in the army. How long has he been with you? 3 years. Ayana settled cross-legged across from him, her own cup cradled in her hands. His parents died in a cavalry raid on their winter camp. I found him half frozen, trying to drag himself to safety with a shattered leg that had healed wrong. The matter-of-fact way she said it made Marcus's chest tighten. You saved him. We saved each other. She took a sip of coffee, her eyes distant with memory. I was struggling after my grandmother's death. Having someone to care for gave me purpose again. Marcus studied her profile in the morning light. Even relaxed, she carried herself with the kind of strength that came from necessity, from being the last line of defense for people who depended on her. But there was something else there too, something vulnerable that she kept carefully hidden. What were you struggling with? He asked quietly. Ayana's hands tightened slightly around her cup. My grandmother was the last of our family. When she died, I became responsible for protecting this valley, for maintaining the treaties she had negotiated with local ranchers and the territorial government. But I was 23 years old and had no idea how to be a leader. She paused, then continued with obvious difficulty. The tribal council wanted me to marry, to find a husband who could speak for our people in negotiations with white officials. They said a woman alone couldn't hold the respect necessary to keep our agreements intact. But you refused. I refused. Her voice held old anger. I told them I was strong enough to protect what my grandmother had built, that I didn't need a man's name to give weight to my words. Marcus heard the pain beneath the anger, the exhaustion of fighting the same battle over and over again. They didn't believe you. Some did, others, she shrugged. Others are still waiting for me to fail to prove their point about women in leadership. Is that why you said no man was strong enough for you to prove a point? Ayanna looked at him sharply, and Marcus thought he'd pushed too far. But then her expression softened slightly. Partly, but also because it was true. She set down her cup and met his gaze directly. Every man who approached me wanted to take control, wanted me to step back and let him handle the important decisions. They saw my strength as something to be tamed rather than respected. Marcus felt something twist in his chest at the loneliness in her voice. That must have been isolating. It was. Until yesterday when you chose to stand beside me instead of behind me. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and risk. Marcus felt the urge to say something profound, but Little Wolf's return interrupted the moment. The boy limped toward them, carrying a small pouch of herbs, his young face serious with concentration. Marcus noticed how Ayanna's entire demeanor shifted when she saw him becoming gentle, sonore, without losing any of her strength. "Show me," she said, and Little Wolf emptied the pouch onto a flat rock, sorting the herbs with careful precision. Marcus watched them work together, preparing the boy's medicine, with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of years of routine. There was love in every movement, in the way Ayanna guided Little Wolf's hands, and the way he leaned into her approval. "Marcus," Little Wolf said suddenly, looking up from his herbs, "Ayanna says you might stay longer than one night. Is that true?" The hope in the boy's voice was almost painful to hear. Marcus glanced at Ayanna, who was watching him with carefully neutral expression. "I'd like to," he said honestly, "but it might not be safe. Marshal Crawford will be back, and when he comes, we'll face him together." Little Wolf interrupted with startling fierceness. "You're family now. Family doesn't abandon family." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Kid, I appreciate that, but—" "No buts." Little Wolf stood, his jaw set in determination that reminded Marcus strongly of Ayanna. "You stood with us yesterday when you could have surrendered. That means something." Ayanna placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Little Wolf, Marcus has his own life to consider. We can't ask him to." "I'm not asking," the boy said quietly. "I'm telling him he belongs here if he wants to, with us." The simple declaration hit Marcus like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had told him he belonged somewhere? When had anyone claimed him as family without expecting something in return? "Little Wolf," he said carefully, "you barely know me. I know enough." The boy's expression grew serious beyond his years. "I know you chose right over easy. I know you didn't run when things got dangerous. And I know Ayanna smiles differently when she looks at you than she has since grandmother died." Marcus glanced at Ayanna, who had gone very still. A flush was creeping up her neck, but she didn't deny Little Wolf's observation. "I see a lot from the shadows," the boy continued matter-of-factly. "People forget I'm watching sometimes. But I watch everything, and I see how lonely Ayanna has been, how tired she gets from being strong all the time, with no one to share the weight." "Little Wolf," Ayanna said quietly, a warning in her voice. "It's true." He turned to Marcus with startling directness. "She needs someone who makes her feel safe enough to not be strong for a little while. Someone who sees her as a person, not just a guardian or a leader or a problem to be solved." The words settled in the morning air like a challenge, and Marcus felt the weight of them in his chest. He looked at Ayanna, who was staring into her coffee cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Is that what you need?" he asked her quietly. For a long moment, she didn't answer. When she finally looked up, Marcus saw something raw and vulnerable in her expression. "I need someone who won't try to make me smaller to make himself feel bigger," she said slowly. "Someone who understands that my strength isn't a challenge to his masculinity, but a gift to our partnership." She paused, then added with obvious difficulty, "I need someone I can trust to still be here when I wake up tomorrow." The admission cost her. Marcus could see it in the tension of her shoulders, the way her hands clenched around her cup. He understood suddenly that her earlier question about whether he was ready to make a stand had been about more than just Crawford. She was asking if he was ready to stay, to build something, instead of just surviving day to day. "I'm tired of running," he said finally, "not just from Crawford, but from connection, from responsibility, from the possibility of losing something that matters to me." Little Wolf was watching them with the intense focus of someone much older than his years. "So you'll stay?" Marcus looked at the boy, then at Ayanna, who was holding her breath, waiting for his answer. "I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you'll have me." The smile that spread across Little Wolf's face was like sunrise, but it was Ayanna's expression that stopped Marcus's heart. Relief and something deeper. Something that looked dangerously like hope flickered in her eyes before she carefully controlled her features. "Good work," Little Wolf said with satisfaction. "Now you need to learn how to live here properly, how to move quietly, how to read the weather signs, how to find water when the spring runs low." "And I suppose you are going to teach me all that?" Marcus asked, grinning at the boy's serious tone. "Of course. Ayanna taught me, now I teach you. That's how family works." As they spent the morning together, Little Wolf proved to be an excellent teacher despite his youth. He showed Marcus the hidden paths through the canyon, the places where edible plants grew, the signs that warned of approaching storms. His disability slowed him down, but never stopped him, and Marcus found himself deeply impressed by the boy's resilience and intelligence. But it was watching Little Wolf with Ayanna that really educated Marcus about the family he was being invited to join. The boy clearly adored her, but their relationship wasn't based on dependency. She had taught him to be capable despite his limitations, to contribute meaningfully to their survival, to take pride in his abilities rather than dwelling on his disability. In return, Little Wolf provided something Ayanna clearly needed: someone to care for, someone who saw past her strength to her heart, someone who gave her permission to be gentle. By midday, Marcus was beginning to understand the rhythm of their life together. It was built on mutual respect and shared responsibility, on the understanding that everyone contributed according to their abilities and everyone mattered equally. It was the kind of family he'd always wanted but never known how to create. They were preparing a simple lunch when the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon again. Marcus felt his muscles tense, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon, but Ayanna held up a hand to stop him. "Not Crawford," she said, listening intently. "These horses move differently. Apache ponies, not army mounts." She was right. Two riders emerged from the canyon entrance, both Apache, both armed, but not threatening. The older man dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle, while the younger warrior remained mounted, alert and ready. "Ayanna, many horses," the older man called in English, though Marcus suspected that was for his benefit. "I am Joseph Standing Bear, council member from the mountain band. We need to speak." Ayanna stepped forward, and Marcus watched her body language shift into something more formal, more guarded. "Joseph Standing Bear, you are welcome at our fire. What brings you to the sacred valley?" "Trouble," Joseph said bluntly, "the kind that follows white soldiers with grudges." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Crawford hadn't just threatened to return with more men, he'd apparently made good on that threat, and word was spreading through the Apache community. "Tell me," Ayanna said simply. Joseph's gaze moved to Marcus, assessing and not entirely friendly. "This man you shelter has brought the Army's attention to our people. Marshal Crawford came to our reservation yesterday with 20 soldiers, demanding we turn over any fugitives we might be harboring." "And what did you tell him?" "We told him we knew nothing of any fugitives." Joseph's expression hardened, but he didn't believe us. "He searched our camps, questioned our people, threatened to cut our government rations if we were found to be lying." Marcus stepped forward, guilt and anger warring in his chest. "I never meant for this to happen. I'll leave immediately." "No." Ayanna's voice cut through his words like a blade. "You'll stay exactly where you are." She turned back to Joseph, and Marcus saw steel in her spine. "Marshal Crawford has no authority to threaten our people's food supplies. His jurisdiction ends at the reservation boundary." "Tell that to hungry children," Joseph replied grimly. "Legal authority and practical power are different things, as you well know." The rebuke hit home, and Marcus watched Ayanna's jaw tighten. She understood the politics of survival better than anyone, the delicate balance between standing on principle and keeping her people fed. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "Turn him over." Joseph's gaze moved to Marcus again. "One man's conscience isn't worth risking our entire community's welfare. And if I refuse, then the council will have to consider whether your guardianship of this valley is serving our people's best interests or serving your own desires. The threat was politely phrased, but absolutely clear. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized what was happening. By choosing to protect him, Ayanna was risking everything she'd worked to build, everything her grandmother had left in her care. Joseph Standing Bear. Little Wolf spoke up suddenly, his young voice carrying surprising authority. This man is family now. He has shared our fire and our shelter. Would you have us betray family to save ourselves? The older man's expression softened slightly as he looked at the boy. Little Wolf, I understand your loyalty, but sometimes we have to choose between what's easy and what's right, the boy interrupted. Isn't that what you taught me when you helped train me after my injury? Isn't that what grandmother always said? Joseph was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the boy's words. Finally, he sighed. Your grandmother was a wise woman, Little Wolf, but she never faced a choice between one outsider's safety and the welfare of hundreds of our people. Didn't she? Ayanna spoke quietly, but her words carried clearly. When she saved Marcus's mother, she risked exposure, risked bringing cavalry attention to our winter camps. But she did it anyway because it was right. That was different. How Ayanna's voice sharpened. Because the person she saved was a woman, because Marcus is a soldier, or because you're afraid Crawford's threats have teeth. Joseph's face darkened. I'm not afraid of anything, Ayanna, many horses. But I'm responsible for more than my own pride. The council sent me to offer you a choice. Give us the deserter, and we'll help you negotiate with Crawford. Keep him, and you'll face whatever comes alone. The ultimatum hung in the air like poison, and Marcus felt the weight of it crushing down on his chest. This was exactly what he'd feared his problems becoming. Ayanna's problems, his choices, threatening people who had never harmed anyone. How long do I have to decide? Ayanna asked. 3 days. After that, we'll assume you've made your choice, and we'll act accordingly. Yet Joseph remounted his horse, but before leaving, he looked down at Little Wolf with something like regret. Your grandmother would be proud of your loyalty, boy, but loyalty without wisdom is just stubbornness. As the two Apache riders disappeared back down the canyon, silence settled over the valley like a shroud. Marcus felt the weight of every choice that had brought him to this moment, every decision that had seemed so clear and necessary at the time, but had led to this impossible situation. I have to leave, he said finally. I won't let you lose everything because of me. You don't get to make that choice alone, Ayanna replied firmly. This affects all of us. But I'm the one bringing the danger. We're the ones choosing how to respond to it. She turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw determination blazing in her eyes. Do you think I've spent 3 years raising Little Wolf to be brave and honorable, just to teach him that we abandon family when things get difficult? Little Wolf limped closer, positioning himself between Marcus and Ayanna in a gesture that was both protective and claiming. We're stronger together than apart. That's what family means. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. You could lose everything. I could, Ayanna agreed, or I could finally build something worth keeping. She moved closer, close enough that Marcus could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could smell the sage and smoke that seemed to cling to her hair. My grandmother used to tell me that the spirits test us by giving us chances to choose who we really are, she said quietly. I think this is one of those moments. And who are you choosing to be? Her answer came without hesitation. Someone who stands by her family no matter the kill. The conviction in her voice was absolute, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. He'd spent so long running from responsibility, from the possibility of losing something important to him, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be claimed by people who had no reason to claim him, except that they chose to. 3 days, he said finally. 3 days, Ayanna confirmed, to figure out how we're going to face whatever comes next. Little Wolf grinned up at them, seemingly unconcerned by the magnitude of what they were facing. I have some ideas about that. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself marveling at the resilience of his chosen family. Instead of dwelling on the threat hanging over them, they spent the time planning, preparing, turning the valley into something that could be defended if necessary. Little Wolf proved invaluable, his knowledge of the terrain and his strategic mind combining to create a detailed defense plan. Ayanna added her own expertise and Marcus contributed his military training until they had something that might actually work. But more than the tactical preparations, Marcus was struck by the way they worked together. There was no hierarchy, no one person making all the decisions. Each contributed their strengths, and each trusted the others to do the same. It was the kind of partnership he'd never experienced, the kind of trust he'd never known he wanted. As evening fell and they sat around their small fire, Marcus found himself thinking about Crawford's ultimatum, about the choice that lay ahead of them. In 3 days, they would have to decide between submission and resistance, between safety and principle. But sitting here with Little Wolf leaning against his shoulder and Ayanna's steady presence across the fire, Marcus realized that the most important choice had already been made. They were family now, for better or worse. And families didn't abandon each other when things got difficult. They found a way through together, or they didn't make it through at all. The third day dawned gray and cold with clouds building on the horizon that promised snow before nightfall. Marcus stood at the valley's edge watching the canyon entrance and trying to quiet the restless energy that had been building in his chest since Joseph Standing Bear's ultimatum. Behind him, Ayanna and Little Wolf moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, but Marcus could feel the tension radiating from both of them. Today was decision day, and all three of them knew it. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness, but these weren't the Apache ponies they'd been expecting. These were army mounts, moving with military precision, and there were a lot of them. "Crawford," Marcus said grimly, reaching for his rifle. Ayanna appeared at his side, her own weapon ready. "More than yesterday. He's brought friends." Little Wolf limped up to join them, and Marcus was struck by how calm the boy appeared. There was no fear in his face, only the kind of determined focus that reminded Marcus powerfully of Ayanna. "How many?" the boy asked quietly. Marcus counted quickly. 12, maybe 15. Too many for us to fight directly. "Then we don't fight directly," Ayanna said. "We fight smart." Crawford's voice boomed across the valley before his men even reached the entrance. "Stone enough, Games. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Come out now, and nobody else has to get hurt." Marcus felt Ayanna stiffen beside him at the implied threat to her and Little Wolf. The careful wording was deliberate. Crawford was making it clear that resistance would have consequences for everyone in the valley, not just Marcus. "What's your play here, Crawford?" Marcus called back. "This is still Apache land. You've got no jurisdiction." "I've got federal authority and enough men to enforce it," Crawford replied. "Jurisdiction is whatever I say it is when I'm dealing with deserters and the people who harbor them." The marshal appeared at the valley entrance, flanked by his men. Marcus recognized some of them as soldiers from Fort Collins, but others wore civilian clothes and had the look of hired guns. Crawford wasn't just planning to arrest him, he was planning to make an example. "Last chance, Stone. Walk out now, face your court-martial like a man, and I'll let your Indian friends go free. Keep hiding behind a woman's skirts, and I'll arrest all of you as accomplices." The insult hit its mark, and Marcus felt rage ignite in his chest. But before he could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air. "Marshal Crawford." Joseph Standing Bear rode into the valley from the opposite direction, flanked by 6 Apache warriors. His arrival changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation, turning what had been a simple arrest into something much more complex. Crawford's men shifted nervously, suddenly aware that they were caught between 2 potentially hostile forces. The marshal himself remained outwardly calm, but Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes as he reassessed the situation. "Standing Bear," Crawford said with false cordiality. "Come to help me collect my fugitive." Joseph dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening, but somehow menacing nonetheless. "I've come to prevent a mistake that would cost both our peoples dearly." "What mistake would that be?" "The mistake of thinking you can threaten Apache families on Apache land without consequences." Joseph's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "The mistake of believing that federal authority extends to violating treaty obligations." Crawford's expression hardened. "This man is a deserter from the United States Army. I have every right." "You have the right to request his extradition through proper diplomatic channels," Joseph interrupted. "You do not have the right to invade sovereign territory with armed men and make threats against non-combatants." Marcus watched the exchange with growing amazement. Joseph Standing Bear was playing a dangerous game, using the legal complexities of tribal sovereignty to challenge Crawford's authority. But it was a game that required perfect timing and absolute nerves. "Are you refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement?" Crawford demanded. "I'm insisting that federal law enforcement follow the law," Joseph replied evenly, "including the treaties that govern interactions between our peoples." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, with both sides calculating odds and options. Marcus could see Crawford weighing the political cost of shooting it out with Apache warriors against the professional cost of returning to Fort Collins empty-handed. That's when Ayanna made her move. She stepped out from behind her cover rifle, held ready, but not directly threatening, and walked slowly toward the center of the valley where everyone could see her clearly. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "This has gone far enough." "Ayanna," Marcus called urgently, but she ignored him, keeping her attention fixed on Crawford. "Marshal Crawford," she continued formally, "I am Ayanna. Many horses, guardian of this valley under tribal law and territorial treaty. The man you seek is under my protection, and I claim the right to speak for him." Crawford's lip curled in disdain. "You've got no authority to speak for anyone, woman. Stand aside." "I have every authority." Ayanna's voice took on a regal quality that made even Crawford's men straighten unconsciously. "This man is my husband, under Apache law, which makes him a member of our tribe. Any action against him is an action against our people." The claim hit like a thunderbolt. Marcus felt his world tilt sideways as he realized what Ayanna was doing. She was using the legal complexities of tribal marriage law to create a shield around him. But the cost? "That's convenient," Crawford sneered. "Marry him yesterday to protect him today. Nobody's going to believe that." "Believe what you choose." Ayanna moved closer to Crawford, and Marcus saw how she used her height and presence to dominate the space around him. "But understand that if you attempt to take my husband by force, you'll be committing an act of war against the Apache people." Joseph Standing Bear stepped forward, adding his voice to hers. "She speaks truth, Marshal. Tribal marriage carries the same legal weight as any other marriage. If this man is her husband, then any action against him requires diplomatic rather than military solutions." Crawford looked between them, clearly frustrated by the legal maze he'd walked into. Marcus could see the marshal's mind working, trying to find a way through or around the obstacles being placed in his path. "Fine," Crawford said finally. "I'll play along with your little charade. But legal marriages require witnesses, documentation, official recognition. You can't just declare yourselves married and expect—" "We were married 3 days ago," Little Wolf spoke up suddenly, limping forward to stand beside Ayanna. "I witnessed it. So did Joseph Standing Bear and his warriors when they came to visit." Marcus stared at the boy in amazement. Little Wolf was lying with absolute conviction, backing up Ayanna's desperate gambit with the kind of detail that might make it believable. Joseph picked up the thread smoothly. "The ceremony follows all traditional requirements. The marriage is valid under tribal law and territorial treaty." Crawford's face was growing red with frustration and anger. "This is all lies, and everyone knows it. These people are making this up as they go along to protect a criminal." "Can you prove that?" Ayanna asked quietly. "Can you prove we weren't married? Can you demonstrate that our tribal customs and laws are invalid? She had him, and everyone knew it. Crawford couldn't prove, or I couldn't prove, the marriage was fake without conducting an investigation that would take weeks and involve territorial officials who were already nervous about Apache relations. The legal technicalities alone would tie him up for months." But Crawford wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily, and Marcus could see him shifting to a different approach. "Maybe I can't prove that the marriage is fake," Crawford said slowly, "but I can arrest all of you for conspiracy to harbor a fugitive. Federal law trumps tribal law when it comes to military desertion." "Does it?" a new voice asked from the canyon entrance. Marcus turned to see a man in an officer's uniform riding into the valley, flanked by 2 soldiers. The newcomer was older than Crawford, with gray hair and the kind of bearing that came from years of command authority. Marcus's blood turned to ice as he recognized the face beneath the military cap. Colonel William Torres, his former commanding officer, the man who had ordered the pacification strategy that Marcus had refused to carry out. "Colonel Torres," Crawford said clearly, surprised by the arrival. "I didn't know you were in the territory." "I came as soon as I received your report about Sergeant Stone. Torres replied, dismounting with the stiff movements of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. This matter requires delicate handling. Marcus felt Ayanna move closer to him, her presence steady and reassuring, even as his world seemed to be collapsing around him. Torres could identify him positively, could cut through all the legal maneuvering with a simple statement of facts. But then Torres turned to look at him, and Marcus saw something unexpected in the colonel's eyes. Not triumph or anger, but something that looked almost like regret. "Sergeant Marcus Stone," Torres said formally, "you've led us quite a chase." "Colonel," Marcus replied, matching his tone, "I suppose you're here to collect your deserter." "Actually, no." Torres' answer surprised everyone, including Crawford. "I'm here to offer you a choice." The colonel moved closer, his gaze taking in Ayanna Little Wolf and the assembled Apache warriors. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of consideration that Marcus had never heard from him before. "The situation in the territory has changed since you left Fort Collins," Torres said carefully. "The Apache pacification strategy has been reconsidered. It seems that cooler heads in Washington have decided that diplomatic solutions are preferable to military ones." Marcus felt Ayanna's hand brush against his, a subtle gesture of support that gave him strength. "What does that mean for me?" "It means that your objections to certain orders have been noted and appreciated by people whose opinions matter." Torres paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "It also means that the charges against you could be dropped under certain circumstances." Crawford stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Colonel, this man is a deserter. Military justice demands." "Military justice is my responsibility, Marshal." Torres cut him off coldly. "Not yours." He turned back to Marcus, and something in his expression had shifted. "Sergeant Stone, I want you to meet someone." Torres gestured toward the Apache warriors, and one of them dismounted and walked forward. As he came closer, Marcus realized this wasn't just any warrior. There was something familiar about his face, something that made Marcus's breath catch. "This is Joseph Many Horses," Torres said quietly, "Ayanna's father." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the Apache warrior, seeing the resemblance to Ayanna in the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. But more than that, he saw something else, the uniform collar visible beneath the man's traditional clothing. "Sergeant Major Joseph Many Horses," Torres continued, "late of the 7th Cavalry, one of our finest scouts and interpreters until he retired to care for his daughter after his wife's death." Marcus felt the world shift around him as the implications sank in. Ayanna's father had been a soldier, had served in the same army that Marcus had deserted. The colonel had come here not just to arrest a fugitive, but to reunite with an old comrade. "Joseph," Torres said, addressing the Apache warrior directly, "I believe we have some things to discuss. About old times, about current situations, and about finding solutions that serve everyone's interests." Joseph Many Horses nodded slowly. "William Torres, you look older." "We both do." Torres' voice carried a warmth that Marcus had never heard before. "Life has a way of teaching us what really matters, doesn't it?" "Yes," Joseph agreed. "It does." As the two old soldiers talked quietly, Marcus felt Ayanna move closer to him. Her hand found his fingers intertwining with a strength that made his chest tight. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. "I suspected," she replied. "The way he talked about the army, about certain officers he'd served with. But I was never sure." Little Wolf limped closer, positioning himself where he could hear the conversation between Torres and Joseph. The boy's face was bright with fascination and something that looked like hope. Crawford, meanwhile, was growing increasingly agitated as he realized that his simple arrest operation was turning into something much more complex. "Colonel, whatever history you have with these people, it doesn't change the fact that Stone is a deserter who needs to face military justice." Torres turned to look at Marshal with cold eyes. "Marshal Crawford, I think it's time for you and your men to return to your normal duties. This matter is now under military jurisdiction." "But that's an order, Marshal, not a request." Crawford's face went through several shades of red before he gained control of himself. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Desertion is still desertion regardless of who's protecting the deserter." "Perhaps," Torres agreed mildly, "but that's no longer your concern." As Crawford and his men prepared to leave, Marcus felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. But he knew this was far from over. Torres might have sent Crawford away, but the colonel still had his own agenda, his own reasons for being here. After Crawford's men disappeared down the canyon, Torres turned back to the assembled group. His gaze moved from Marcus to Ayanna to Little Wolf, taking in the family dynamic with obvious understanding. "Sergeant Stone," he said finally, "I've been thinking a great deal about our last conversation at Fort Collins, about your objections to certain orders, about your concerns regarding civilian casualties." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. And I've come to realize that you were right," Torres said simply. "The pacification strategy was wrong morally and strategically. The civilian casualties would have been enormous, and the political cost would have been catastrophic." The admission hung in the morning air like a small miracle. Marcus felt years of guilt and anger begin to shift in his chest, not disappearing, but changing into something he could live with. "That doesn't change what I did," Marcus said quietly. "I still deserted." "Yes, you did. But you deserted rather than participate in something you knew was wrong." Torres paused, then added with obvious difficulty, "That took a different kind of courage than I was willing to acknowledge at the time." Joseph Manny Horses stepped forward, adding his voice to the conversation. "My daughter tells me you stood with her against Crawford, that you chose danger over safety to protect our family." "She's my family too now," Marcus said simply. Joseph nodded slowly. "Yes, Joseph Standing Bear told me about the marriage ceremony, about how you've been accepted into our people." Marcus felt Ayanna's hand tighten in his, and he realized that her father was accepting the fictional marriage as real, giving it the weight of parental approval. "Colonel," Marcus said carefully, "what exactly are you offering me?" Torres smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, it looked genuine. "A commission transfer to territorial liaison duty. Officially, you'll be working with tribal leaders to maintain peace and implement the new diplomatic initiatives. Unofficially, you'll be doing what you've already been doing, standing up for what's right regardless of the political cost. And the desertion charges will disappear into the bureaucratic maze of military paperwork. Officially, you were on detached duty investigating territorial conditions. The paperwork just got misfiled for a few months." It was more than Marcus had dared to hope for, more than he'd thought possible when Crawford had first cornered him in this valley. But looking at Torres, at Joseph, at the carefully neutral expressions of the Apache warriors, Marcus realized there was more to this offer than simple mercy. "What do you want in return?" he asked. "Nothing you're not already willing to give," Torres replied. "Your service to the territory, your commitment to peaceful solutions, your expertise in working with tribal leaders." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "And your continued marriage to Ayanna. Many horses, of course. Having a liaison officer who's actually family to one of the most influential Apache leaders in the territory would be invaluable for maintaining peace." Marcus felt his breath catch. Torres was asking him to make the fictional marriage real, to commit not just to the deception, but to the life it represented. He turned to look at Ayanna, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was hope there, and fear, and something deeper that made his chest tighten with possibility. "Ayanna," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "If Crawford had never come, if there had been no threat, no need for deception, would you still want me to stay?" The question hung between them, stripping away all the politics and tactics and legal maneuvering to expose the simple truth underneath. Marcus held his breath, waiting for an answer that would change everything. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "I've spent my entire adult life proving I was strong enough to stand alone," she said. "But these past few days I've realized that standing alone isn't the same as being strong. Sometimes real strength means being brave enough to stand with someone else." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I want you to stay, Marcus Stone. Not because I need protection, not because of legal complications, but because when I look at you, I see a partner instead of a problem. I see someone who makes me want to be brave enough to build something instead of just protecting what already exists." The words hit him like a revelation, like the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life without knowing it. He'd been running for so long, avoiding connection and commitment, because he was afraid of losing what mattered to him. But standing here in this hidden valley, surrounded by people who had chosen to claim him as family, Marcus realized that the only way to avoid loss was to never have anything worth losing in the first place. And that wasn't living. That was just surviving. Little Wolf, Marcus said, turning to the boy who had been watching the entire exchange with bright, hopeful eyes. What do you think? Can we make this family thing official? Little Wolf's grin was like sunrise breaking over mountains. I think it's about time. Marcus turned back to Ayana, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ayana, many horses, will you marry me? For real this time, not for protection or politics, but because I love you and want to build a life with you and Little Wolf. Her smile started small and grew until it transformed her entire face. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will. As they kissed for the first time, Marcus heard Little Wolf's whoop of joy, heard Torres and Joseph chuckling with approval, heard the Apache warriors murmuring their own blessings. But mostly he heard the sound of his own heart finally finding its home. 3 months later, Marcus Stone stood in the same hidden valley where his life had changed forever, watching his wife teach their son how to track deer through fresh snow. The official paperwork had come through the week before his commission, transfer his new posting, his marriage certificate signed by territorial officials, and witnessed by both Apache elders and Army officers. The fictional marriage that had saved his life had become the foundation for the real life he'd never dared to dream of. Crawford had tried one more time to cause trouble, but Torres had transferred him to a post in Alaska where his particular brand of law enforcement would be less problematic. The marshal's departure had been celebrated quietly by both military and civilian officials who'd grown tired of his heavy-handed methods. The Apache Tribal Council had voted to approve Marcus's adoption into the mountain band, making his marriage to Ayana not just legal but blessed by her people. Joseph Standing Bear had been among those voting in favor, convinced by Little Wolf's passionate speech about the meaning of family and Marcus's proven commitment to their welfare. But the best part, the part that still made Marcus's chest tight with gratitude every morning when he woke up, was the simple fact that he'd found his place in the world. Not just geographical location, but emotional home. People who chose him and claimed him and expected him to choose and claim them in return. As he watched Ayana patiently correct Little Wolf's technique, Marcus thought about the amulet around his neck, about the chain of gratitude and connection that had led him to this moment. His mother had been saved by a healer who asked for nothing in return. That healer's granddaughter had saved him not just from Crawford, but from the loneliness that had been eating at him for years. Maybe his mother had been right about gifts coming when they were most needed. Maybe the spirits really did send people what they needed when they needed it most. Or maybe some debts could only be repaid by being passed forward, creating new connections and new possibilities for grace. Whatever the explanation, Marcus knew he was exactly where he belonged. Standing in a hidden valley in Wyoming territory, married to a woman who taught him that real strength meant being brave enough to be vulnerable, raising a boy who'd shown him that family was a choice rather than an accident. He'd stopped running, and in stopping, he had found everything he'd been running toward without knowing it. Marcus, Little Wolf called, his voice bright with excitement. Come see these tracks. Ayana says they're from a mountain cat, but I think they're too big. Marcus grinned and jogged through the snow toward his family, toward home, toward the life he'd finally learned how to build instead of just survive. Behind him, the wind whispered through the canyon walls, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of spring. Carrying the echo of his mother's voice, the memory of a turquoise amulet, and the endless possibility of second chances. Some debts, Marcus thought, as he reached his wife and son, were the best kind to owe, the kind that paid themselves forward in love. If you enjoyed Marcus and Ayana's journey from strangers to family, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest Western romance adventures. Your support helps us bring you more stories of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that make us who we're meant to be.